Hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater, and I'd like to welcome all of you back to the show. This is the 500 Movies in 2025 series, and for this episode, this will be movies number 257 through 261. Okay, so before I get into the show tonight, just want to address a couple things regarding the streams. um, so currently, I am still using StreamYard. Uh, they have done some changes here lately. So, and I've been on the free account since I've started doing this channel at the beginning of the year. And it seems like in the last week they have changed to where on the free account, I cannot use my uploaded videos, such as my CraterMania intro or my outro that shows the subscribe button, the notification button, all that cool stuff. Um, so now they're asking me to upgrade in order to use those again, or if I want to, use certain like images, I guess, and stuff that I've uploaded to show on the stream. It's kind of ridiculous. Because I mean, I refuse to pay $45 a month to use StreamYard. Um, and just um, and I apologize, guys. I apologize for the generic intro, the countdown thing, and then what you're going to see at the end of this show too is generic, just a sample thing from StreamYard. Um, if that's just what I have to do, like I said in the beginning when I started this channel, I'm not looking to do anything uh, flashy or anything. Like I'm not claiming to be some big professional YouTuber or streamer or whatever. Um, I'm here, for the sole purpose to talk about movies. These movies that I'm watching, I set a goal for myself to watch 500 movies in 2025, and by God, I'm going to do it. You know, I don't have to have some, professional intro or anything or outro or anything, looking flashy like a lot of these YouTubers out there, which that it's cool. I mean, what they do is cool. Everything that they put, the work they put into their channels is really cool. But I just don't have the will to do that. You know what I mean? I don't have the will to put the money into it to make these professional intros and everything that goes into the channel. Um, and anybody that follows the channel and that watches these videos and stuff, um, I hope you would understand because, like I said, um, it's literally like that intro that I had was like 15 seconds, and then the rest is just is just me, and and I'm just talking about these movies, and that's pretty much how it's going to be, unless something changes and StreamYard changes where I can upload and use my own videos again on the free account. Because, like I said, I refuse StreamYard to pay your 45 fucking dollars a month to use your core services. So I may look for another service, but StreamYard is pretty easy to use. I'd rather just stick with that and not have anything flashy. But all right, I've talked enough about that. So I spent about 5 minutes talking about that shit. That's enough. I don't need to go any further. And that'll probably be the last time I address it. So just like anybody watches any future videos and asks like, "Hey, where's your intro stuff?" Just I'll just direct them back, in the comments to this video where I talk about this. And like I said, I don't need to address it anymore. I'm here to talk about movies and stuff that I like, and that's it. So, all right, now on to the show, guys. So this is part two of Shark Week. So if you watched the show from this past Thursday, where I talked about Jaws and the Jaws sequels, that was a lot of fun. That was my like biggest idea when I was going into putting this Shark Week thing together. So it was just kind of building it around Jaws and those sequels. Um, But these other movies I'm gonna be talking about tonight is, this is just a tribute to killer shark movies that are not a part of the Jaws franchise. And I've labeled this episode Feast of Flesh. So this name that I came up with for this particular episode, Feast of Flesh, will also factor into next week's theme here on the 500 movies in 2025. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand why. So this week, I watched a couple of movies that I was very familiar with, and three of them that I had never watched before. And I absolutely had a great time, a really fun time, an entertaining time, watching every single one of these, including these three that I had never seen before. Um, so I guess let's go ahead and start off this conclusion of Shark Week with one of those movies that was a first time watch for me. Um, a movie that has only been on my radar for a couple of years now, and this movie came out in the '90s. It's been recommended to me by several friends, including my friends over at Dead Pit. Because they know my sense of humor. Um, so let's be clear. There are shark movies that you watch for the tension, the masterful filmmaking, the primal fear of the unknown. You watch Jaws for art. You watch if you've ever seen the movie The Shallows for suspense. You watch Deep Blue Sea for that kind of self-aware fun. And then there is the 1995. I don't know if I'd call it a classic, but it may be like a so bad it's good classic. But that's Cruel Jaws. Okay, so you don't just watch this movie. It's a hell of an experience. So it is kind of like I said, that so bad it's good type of movie. Just this train wreck that you just can't look away from. And I think for a lot of shark movie fans, especially myself, who has I've sat through, a ton of like really bad movies, like like asylum movies, and the Italian like knockoff movies. This film isn't just one of those types of movies. This is I could see this is kind of becoming like one of those so bad it's good rite of passage movies. Um, so the plot is just this beautiful, chaotic mess. I mean, we have this Hulk Hogan lookalike named Dag. He's running this small town SeaWorld type amusement park. And you got this greedy developer who's trying to foreclose on him. And then, Dag's daughter, who is this, competitive swimmer, despite being in a wheelchair, and you got these mobsters who are somehow involved in this real estate deal. And there's this killer tiger shark that the film insists is the spawn of the shark from Jaws. Uh, it's really not just a plot. It's this kind of blender, full of um, every '80s action and monster movie stereotype and theme that and you love it just for its sheer audacity. Uh, I absolutely had a ball watching this movie. The performances in it are just like a masterclass in this kind of overacting, and every line is just delivered with this kind of soap opera intensity that just makes you wonder, if the actors are in on this like joke or something, but they aren't, and that's what makes the movie even more entertaining. It makes it even better. The dialogue is just pure gold. from these nonsensical threats, like I'm gonna cut off your balls and wear them for earrings, just all this. There's a lot of baffling like things that happen in this movie. Um, but I think the real genius here, the piece de resistance, is is the shark footage that is used in this. The filmmakers didn't have the budget, to I guess shoot their own, or so they did the next best thing. That they stole it, and shamelessly, we get footage from Jaws 2. Um, and then there's like this there's some more footage from this like Italian Jaws ripoff, The Last Shark. It's and we even get to hear like a bit of the Star Wars theme in certain parts of the movie as well. So it's kind of like a greatest hits of other better shark movies plus the Star Wars theme all stitched together with this kind of grace of um, of a like a patchwork quilt, that was made in the dark. Like 1 minute you're watching this, crystal clear shot of a shark from this multi-million-dollar Hollywood film, and the next you're looking at this this grainy, murky footage of this completely different shark uh, from a different movie. And, uh, it's ridiculous, guys. Um, it's jarring. It's illegal, and it's absolutely hilarious. Um, Cruel Jaws, I think, fails at being a competent film on every level, but it succeeds spectacularly, I think, at being unforgettable entertainment. And that's what I'm all about. Like, it could as long as I'm being entertained, it doesn't matter if the movie is bad or it's good. As long as I'm being entertained, I think that's all that matters to me, you know and this movie is definitely unforgettable. And I could say that I would probably watch this again just with like with family or friends or something, so we could just sit and laugh at it. It's it's a testament, I think, as well to this kind of bygone era of filmmaking, where passion and plagiarism kind of went hand in hand. For anyone who loves shark movies, and not just for the scares, but for that sheer joy and just absurdity of the genre, then Cruel Jaws has got to be up there as one of the holy grails for that. And I'll tell you, the film's I think most notorious feature, like I said earlier, is that extensive use of that unauthorized stolen footage, from other movies to kind of pad out its runtime and provide like shark attack sequences and all that, and just that like I said they couldn't afford to film. And like I said, that includes all that footage lifted from like Jaws. Um, Jaws 2 and that Italian knockoff, The Last Shark. And I think there's also another one called Deep Blood that they have this kind of stock shark footage. And I think it was an Italian horror film as well. Um, well, I'm not sure. I may be getting it mixed up. I don't know if The Last Shark was Italian or not. But if it wasn't, just somebody in the comments correct me on that. But I know that Deep Blood is one of the like Italian horror films that they use stock footage from as well. Um, but anyway, the director of Cruel Jaws is legendary Italian schlock master, if you want to call him that, Bruno Mattei. But for this film, he went under this pseudonym William Snyder, to kind of likely make it, I guess, more marketable to international audiences, and just I guess perhaps kind of obscure his involvement. I'm not. I'm really not sure what was the reason for that. But Bruno Mattei, he was, I think, one of the most, um, kind of prolific and infamous directors in the history of Italian exploitation movies. You know, and not in the best way that you can think, but because he was like this kind of scavenger. His career was really built on creating these low budget knockoffs of of popular American movies. That were really popular. Really popular over in the U.S. and um, it's often with this kind of complete disregard for copyright laws, and the kind of narrative coherence, or really just basic filmmaking competence. So he was known, for like blatant ripoffs. If a movie was a hit in America, then Bruno Mattei would make a cheap Italian version of it. And like in Cruel Jaws, there's that use of stock footage. He frequently padded his films with footage from other movies, whether it be action scenes or nature shots, whatever, just to save money. And his as far as like gore and sleaze is involved, his films often kind of featured a lot of gratuitous violence and nudity to appeal to the exploitation market. But Cruel Jaws happens to be one of those films that doesn't have a lot of that. It has gratuitous violence in it for sure, but as far as nudity, I don't remember any nudity in Cruel Jaws. But he would often, like use like he did in this film where he used the name William Snyder. He would often use these American sound names like Vincent Dawn or William Snyder. Did these, and I still really don't know the true reason why he did that. But maybe it was just a way of him from like where he would steal all this footage and stuff. I guess it was a way of keeping him out of trouble. I don't know. I'm really not sure. Um, but you may know some of his other films like in the horror genre, especially like the Hell of the Living Dead, um, which was this zombie film that shamelessly rips off Dawn of the Dead and just kind of famously steals its entire musical score from the band Goblin. So yeah, there's that exists, and then there's also Rats: Night of Terror, which was this kind of this apocalyptic film where these survivors are besieged by these hordes of killer rats. Um, and that's one that I've actually never seen. I still do need to see Rats Out of Terror, but I've heard from a lot of people say that it's so bad. But I don't know, like like I said, I'm different from a lot of people. Like there are really bad films out there, but as long as, like I said, as long as I'm being entertained, I that's all that matters to me. So maybe that I can watch Rats Not a Terror sometime, and maybe it might entertain me. We'll see. But Cruel Jaws, I think, is arguably probably that quintessential Bruno Mattei film. Because it's cheap, it's nonsensical. It's built almost entirely from stolen parts. Um, but this film does have a legacy though, and its legacy is not one of any kind of cinematic achievement or anything, but I think just it seems like even though I've known about this in the past couple of years, I've heard so many people talk about it, so it's almost kind of got like this cult following now. And I think that its impact is felt, most strongly within the communities of these bad movie fans and these B movie horror, aficionados. Um, it has become at this point, I think, the ultimate Jaws exploitation film. While there were dozens of Jaws ripoffs in the '70s and '80s, like Orca and Piranha and Tentacles, Cruel Jaws is I think considered the genre's kind of chaotic endpoint. But by not only copying the plot of Jaws, but also physically stealing footage from it and its sequel. as well as from another ripoff. It represents the genre eating its own tail. It's it's kind of like that complete act, of jaws exploitation that's probably been ever committed to film, I would think. Um, but I say that in the most positive way that I can because, like I said, I really was entertained by this movie. I mean, it's one of those so bad it's good. Um, and to some people, it can be seen as probably one of those holy grails of bad movies. Uh, you know, Cruel Jaws was, from what I understand, for decades, uh, very difficult to find. It was never officially released in many countries just due to all the copyright infringement in the film, and just that this kind of rarity, combined with tales of its absurdity, and it kind of turned it into a legend. It seems, for bad movie fans, it just finding a bootleg VHS copy was like would be like uncovering a hidden treasure or something. I would think, because it seems like there's a lot of like stuff surrounding this movie online if you look for it. And like I said, it's become a cult classic for those types of bad movie fans now. But the I think really the film's legacy was cemented here now in the 21st century with the rise, of the internet and these boutique home video labels that are all out there now. Companies like Severin Films, they're the ones who finally gave Cruel Jaws this high quality, official Blu-ray release back in 2020. Like I said, and that's just when I started hearing like stuff about the movie. Like it was just a few years ago. It was shortly after that Severin had put that release out. They just and I commend Severin Films for that because they really had to navigate all these um, complex rights issues and stuff with the film. So it's I really you got to give it up to them for trying to get this movie out there, and this really brought the film out of the shadows and just kind of exposed its madness to this new wider audience. And I think that really solidifies its status as a must see. So bad it's good, cult classic. Um, but going into like the filmmaking and stuff, it's really almost like a case study, in exploitation filmmaking. So, academically and historically, the film serves as this kind of time capsule of, late stage Italian exploitation filmmaking. It demonstrates the cost cutting measures, the um, just the disregard for intellectual properties and just the that desperate attempt to really to appeal to this global market that defined the industry as it was collapsing in the 1990s. um, but in this kind of vast ocean of killer shark movies, Cruel Jaws, it may not be the biggest or the fastest or scariest, predator, killer shark movie that there is. But it is, I think, that cinematic equivalent, of a goofy, cobbled together from parts of other movies, and more successful creatures. And it's just, it's precisely this bizarre construction that makes it so fascinating, I think, and appealing and entertaining to people. Like I said earlier, it's like a train wreck that you can't look away from. It's a film with no budget, no shame, and almost no original footage, but it delivers just this pure entertainment. Um, and for a shark movie fan who can appreciate just that joy of a perfectly executed disaster, um, Cruel Jaws is a catch of a lifetime. Definitely check it out, and just give it a chance. I mean, it's not. It's like I said, it's not the greatest movie in the world or anything, guys. But it's just one of those movies that you can have fun with, that you can sit and laugh at, and you'll be entertained. You know, and I suggest watching this with like some family members or friends, so you can all just kind of be entertained uh, in collectively. So yeah, definitely check out Cruel Jaws. It's on Tubi for free, guys, if you want to watch it. So go on Tubi, watch Cruel Jaws. Um, all right, up next we have Deep Blue Sea from 1999. And if you go into Deep Blue Sea, expecting Jaws, and you've already lost. Jaws is a slow burn masterpiece of suspense. Um, a character study that happens to feature a shark. Um, but Deep Blue Sea is something else entirely. And I've seen this movie plenty of times. I absolutely love this movie. I have so much fun with this movie. And I'm a diehard fan of creature features. Um, and this movie is just a slice of like B movie heaven, wrapped in this big budget Hollywood package. I think it's without a doubt one of the greatest dumb fun shark movies ever made. So one of the things I really love about this movie is it fully embraces its kind of ludicrous premise. Um, so you got these genetically engineered, hyper intelligent mako sharks as a byproduct of Alzheimer's research. So, I mean, that premise alone, I'm like, sign me up. This film knows that this is ridiculous, and it leans into it with absolute glee. This isn't about the primal fear of just the unknown lurking in the depths like Jaws. This is a high octane action horror film where the monsters are strategic, vengeful super predators. They don't just bite, they plan. They hunt in packs, flood corridors and use, a victim as a battering ram to break reinforced glass. I mean, it's fucking magnificent. I love it. The special effects are a massive part of this movie's charm. And this was in an era that was beginning to overuse CGI. Director Rennie Harlan, which we've talked about a couple times in the past here in the channel. He wisely invested in these kind of breathtakingly, detailed animatronics from Stan Winston Studios. And when those mako sharks, slam into a viewport or rise from the water, they really had this tangible weight and menace that that modern CGI often lacks. I think you feel the power in every thrash and every bite. You can tell that there's something physical about it. That there's no CGI involved in that. And then there you look at the cast of this movie, which is I think is a was a wonderful ensemble, for this kind of movie. Thomas Jane, who is this this strong, silent, shark wrangler named Carter Blake. He's the kind of gritty anchor, of common sense for this movie. Then you got LL Cool J, who's the cook of this ship. His name is Preacher. He kind of provides that comic relief and just a little bit of surprising heroism too. He makes it. He's alive at the end, so it kind of and he gives us this unforgettable line. You ate my bird, which because Preacher had this pet parrot, and I mean, it's very sad what happens to his parrot, but I mean, it's also comical at the same time. Like I said, this movie is ridiculous, guys, and it's not one to take serious. Um, but I think the movie's legacy is cemented by one man and one scene in this movie, And Dave Chappelle even parodied it on the Chappelle Show one time. Samuel L. Jackson, as this corporate suit, Russell Franklin. So he delivers this kind of deep, rousing cliche speech. We're going to pull together. We're going to survive. And it's the kind of speech you've seen 100 times. And it also kind of like feels like it was also parodying the speech from Independence Day. Um, and just as he reaches the crescendo of that speech, chomp, a shark leaps from the moon pool and devours him mid sentence. It's I can still remember watching this as a kid. I was about 12 years old, I think, when this movie came out. And I remember watching this with my dad, and like it was shocking, but it was also hilarious, and and it was just definitely one of the more brilliant jump scares in the history of movies in the 90s. It tells that audience all the rules are off, and no one is safe. And you'll learn that as the movie continues, and especially towards the end. So from that whole claustrophobic tension, the flooding hallways to the raptors in the kitchen homage, to Jurassic Park, this time with sharks. The movie is just this relentless thrill ride. It never stops moving. It throwing one impossible situation um, to after another at the cast is just dwindling down as the movie goes on. And so for any fan who loves, I think, a good monster movie, then Deep Blue Sea, it isn't just a guilty pleasure for me. I think it's an example of how to do that genre right. It's loud, it's explosive, it's just unapologetically entertaining. And the director, like I said, of Deep Blue Sea is Rennie Harlan. And we spoke about Rennie Harlan a few times on here. He became this major force in Hollywood's action genre. During the late 80s and the 90s, and he's known for these signature style of just high concept, large scale, visually slick action blockbusters. Just with the explosive set pieces. Like, he would excel at just crafting these elaborate and over the top action sequences. And, his narratives, often involve like ticking clock scenarios and, contain dangerous environments like an airport, a mountain range, or a sinking facility like in Deep Blue Sea. And he just had this more is more philosophy. He's not a director that's known for subtlety. His films are loud and fast paced and just kind of filled with spectacle. And we've talked about, like I said, we talked about a couple of movies here in the past. He did Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. He did Cliffhanger, which we covered. He's also, he did Die Hard 2. And he proved with Die Hard 2, he could handle a massive franchise, just delivering, a sequel that kind of upped the scale and explosive action, of the original. And same thing like by doing that sequel for Nightmare on Elm Street with Part 4. He proved that he could work in the horror genre as well. Um, but Deep Blue Sea is this kind of perfect distillation of the Rennie Harlan style. I think just a high concept premise, this claustrophobic setting, a massive budget, and just nonstop action. It's so awesome. I just, like I said, I've watched this movie several times over the years, and just I think the legacy of this movie is just it's far greater than its kind of initial mix and critical reception would suggest. It's solidified its place as a beloved cult classic with this significant impact on its genre. um if you look at the bridge in the shark subgenre for nearly 25 years after Jaws, there was this kind of void of these major successful shark films. they weren't happening. Deep Blue Sea was that first big budget studio shark movie in a generation to become a box office hit. It kept the genre alive, and it served as this kind of crucial bridge, between the Jaws era and this 21st century resurgence of shark films, which we'll be talking about a couple of those here in just a few minutes. Um, but going back to the Samuel L. Jackson death scene, I think that this is the film's most enduring legacy. The scene is legendary, for its kind of brilliant, subversion of, cinematic themes. It built up the expectation of this heroic, inspiring speech from possibly the biggest star in the film, only to just violently and suddenly eliminate him from the whole story. It's frequently, I think, cited as one of the greatest moments in the film, and it was definitely super unexpected. So like I said, even it made an impact on Dave Chappelle since he parodied it on the Chappelle show when they were doing like the Samuel L. Jackson beer instead of Samuel Adams, it's Samuel L. Jackson beer. And he's like in that guy's face. He's like, "A shark ate me. A fucking shark ate me." So I mean, definitely, it's probably the most memorable thing from the entire film. But just that moment alone cemented the film in pop culture and just demonstrated this kind of willingness to to shock the audience. So I love that about it. And this, while it was not the first film to use this idea of a genetically enhanced monster, Deep Blue Sea made it popular, and for the new generation, that concept of a creature that wasn't just instinct driven, but was this thinking, planning villain. It really heavily influenced that wave of creature features that would follow. Especially in these like direct to video movies and the and stuff in like the sci-fi channel market. The sharks in Deep Blue Sea are antagonists. They're not just animals. Um, and just I think that this movie really created a benchmark, for practical effects. It was released on this cusp of the CGI revolution. So the film is a showcase for that incredible power of animatronics and practical effects. The work by Stan Winston Studio, which worked on Aliens and Jurassic Park and countless other films. You know, they gave the sharks a kind of visceral, physical presence that is still, I think, talked about today. Um, you know, and like film enthusiasts, often kind of point to Deep Blue Sea as a prime example of how practical effects can create a unique sense of weight and danger. Um, and it's become another cult classic too. Film has been just reevaluated. Over time now. Some critics dismissed it as silly or whatever in 1999. But I think nowadays it's celebrated as just unapologetically fun. It has become that go-to example for a lot of people of this perfect turn your brain off and enjoy the ride. And I love those types of movies. I really do. It's just I don't think you should go into every movie that you watch and it require you to think and overanalyze things about it. Um, I like going into a movie and just being entertained and having fun, and and if it's for me, I'll let you know for sure. I'll be completely honest about it. You know, and just this movie's reputation has just grown, I think, immensely over the years, and it's now considered, I think, a staple for some people of the whole action horror genre. Um, and just I think the popularity uh, has kind of led to that, the production of, two direct to video sequels, which was Deep Blue Sea 2 and Deep Blue Sea 3, which are not that great. They came out way after the original. I think Deep Blue Sea 2 came out like 2018, and then Deep Blue Sea 3 came out in 2020. Um, so, I mean, but even though those aren't great movies, it proves that the original kind of has this recognition about it. You know what I mean? And it had enough of a fan base to put money into creating sequels that would come uh, like 20 years later after the original, um, which seems to be like a kind of a trend here in the past decade of just making these sequels to older movies like Beetlejuice, and we got the Goonies sequels coming out. I think they're talking about Gremlins 3 is finally coming out, and just stuff like that. If you look at the Flash movie, bringing back Michael Keaton as Batman in that, I mean, just stuff like that. Nostalgia is a big thing right now, especially stuff from like 20, 30 years ago, or even longer. People eat that shit up, man. And but back to Deep Blue Sea though, it's just this really, I think it's a triumphant creature feature that just understood its mission perfectly. Just to deliver these nonstop, high energy thrills. It wisely sidestepped, the shadow of Jaws by creating its own identity as this kind of action packed, sci-fi horror spectacle. And just propelled by Rennie Harlin's, direction, a memorable cast, uh, one of the most iconic death scenes from the 90s. I think it's just really evolved, from this, this summer blockbuster into this, enduring cult classic. And for its, blend of, practical effects and that the relentless pacing that it has and just that pure fun that it brings. I think Deep Blue Sea, it remains a high mark, for what a big, loud, and gloriously entertaining monster movie can be. Um, so yeah, definitely check out Deep Blue Sea if you've never seen it, or even if you have seen it. Um, I think it might be time for you to watch it again, because I know I had a hell of a lot of fun rewatching it again this past week. But on to the next movie. So these next couple of movies actually, I had never seen these either. So not only was Cruel Jaws new to me as far as watching movies this past week, but these next two movies I'm going to be talking about um, were on my radar. They have been since actually they came out, but I just had never watched them. And man, did I have some fun watching these movies. I mean, these were so cool, and I can't wait to watch these again with my family or some friends or whatever, or even just watch them by myself again. I think these were a lot of fun, and so let's go ahead and talk about the first one out of these two. For those of us who love shark movies, the release of a new big budget entry is always cause for you know both excitement and trepidation. So we've endured that the murky depths of low budget schlock, and just worshipped at the altar, to of Jaws. We've seen it all, for a killer shark movie fans. Um, and let me tell you, the Meg from 2018, it isn't just another, one of those, releases that came out and it was, oh yeah, it's another shark movie or whatever. No, this is a very awesome, unapologetic tidal wave of pure joy. I love this movie. And but again, like I said before, like these other movies I've talked about, the Meg is not trying to be Jaws. Comparing it to Spielberg's, masterpiece is like comparing a monster truck rally to a chess match. They're entirely different sports, but they're both brilliant, in their own right. Jaws is about that unseen terror, that suspense that lurks, beneath the waves. The Meg is about the, that sheer spectacle, of a 75-foot prehistoric killing machine, turning a submarine into a chew toy. It trades like that psychological dread for this high octane adrenaline, and I absolutely love it. I mean, I think it is so awesome. Jason Statham as Jonas Taylor is, I mean, perfect casting for that character. He brings exactly that right amount of that grizzled seriousness, and that whole "I'm too old for this, but I'm the only one who can do it" type of energy. You believe that this is a man who could plausibly go toe to toe with this huge ass shark, this megalodon. He's not this terrified police chief like Brody and Jaws. He's this human battering ram. The film understands its hero and just unleashes him beautifully. I mean, it's totally unrealistic, but I mean, it's so fun and entertaining. You know, but the real star of this movie is, of course, the megalodon itself. The Meg. So the visual effects team deserves immense credit for creating this creature that is both, terrifying and awesome. And I mean, yeah, it's CGI, but it's CGI done well, I think. That the sense of scale is just phenomenal. The first reveal that you see of this giant shark, when it dwarfs this deep sea, submarine, is just this. It's an all time great, creature feature moment. Um, the film kind of wisely gives us, plenty of screen time with this monster, from, the underwater chase scenes to, now that iconic chaotic attack on Sonya Bay, which is the where all the people are like partying and everything. That whole beach scene is just like a masterclass in blockbuster mayhem. I think, just it's kind of this beautiful symphony of, of screaming swimmers and inflatable rafts and just, this one very very huge ass hungry shark. Um, what really, elevates the Meg is its self awareness. It knows that it's absurd. The dialogue is full of witty one liners like what's that Jason Statham says? Man versus Meg isn't a fight; it's a slaughter, or something like that. It's and just the supporting cast, especially Paige Kennedy as DJ and Rainn Wilson as the that billionaire Morris. Um, just it leans into the fun, and the chick, what's her name? Lee Bing Bing, I think is her name. Plays Su Yin. She isn't just this helpless damsel in distress or whatever, but she's this this capable scientist who gets in her own shark cage just to face this monster. And the film just has this heart and it has this sense of humor, that keeps it from ever feeling cynical. I think the Meg is, this is a love letter, I think, to the monster movies of yesteryear, of decades ago. And it's kind of supercharged with this modern blockbuster budget. And I think it delivers on every single promise that its premise makes. There's a giant shark, massive action set pieces, and just a hero who is just as formidable as the monster he's hunting. It's really like a theme park ride of a film. And as just a lifelong fan of these, these killer movies, killer sharks in movies, especially Jaws, the Jaws movies, and Deep Blue Sea, and all that. I'll be the first in line to 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 take this ride again and again. I love this movie so much. Like I said, I can't wait to watch these again with friends, family, or even by myself again, because I had a really good time watching them. But like I said, the premise of this, the Meg is this, just kind of, it's a sci-fi, action film that was based on um, this 1997 book called Meg, a novel of deep terror by Steve Alton. And the story revolves around just the discovery of this surviving population of a megalodon. The species that was of these giant prehistoric sharks. Thought to be extinct for millions of years. Um, so the film, opens at this state of the art, underwater research facility. Excuse me. Which is called Mana One, and it's funded by this cocky billionaire played by Rainn Wilson, under the name Jack Morris. So this research team is led by this chick named Lori. She they breached this kind of hydrogen sulfide layer at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And they're discovering this previously unknown hidden ecosystem. So their submersible is suddenly attacked and disabled by this massive unidentified creature, leaving them stranded. So the operations manager, Dr. Minwei Zhang, and his daughter, who's this oceanographer, Su Yin, they decide they need the best deep sea rescue diver in the world, which is Jonas Taylor, Jason Statham's character. So Taylor, he's living in this kind of self-imposed exile in Thailand. You know, um, disgraced after a previous rescue mission where he was forced to abandon, half his crew, claiming they were attacked by this giant creature that no one believed even existed. So, reluctantly, Taylor, he agrees to help rescue his ex-wife Lori, and he successfully pilots this craft to their disabled sub. But they are, once again attacked by this creature now revealed to be a megalodon. And while they manage to escape, their actions inadvertently, create this kind of thermal breach in that hydrogen sulfide layer, allowing the Meg to escape the trench and and enter into the open ocean. So the rest of the film just kind of becomes this high stakes hunt. The crew of Mana One must track and kill this huge ass shark before it reaches um, the populated coastlines and and wreaks havoc or whatever. Um, and their efforts kind of lead to several dangerous encounters, including like I said, this shark cage sequence with Su Yin, and there's this major confrontation that reveals there isn't just one megalodon, but there's two. And the whole climax of the film sees this larger megalodon descend upon this crowded Sanya Bay in China, forcing Jonas into a this final desperate battle using this small submersible and a harpoon to stop this huge shark for good. Um, but the director of the Meg is, and I'm probably going to butcher this guy's name, so I apologize. John Turteltaub. I don't know if that's how I'm actually supposed to pronounce it, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. So John Turteltaub is known for being a reliable, and commercially successful Hollywood director who specialized in like mainstream entertainment. He's not considered a filmmaker with a highly distinct artistic style, but rather a kind of a skilled craftsman who can handle big budgets and ensemble cast and a mix of different genres. I think he's best known for the National Treasure movies with Nicolas Cage. He also did Cool Runnings in 1993, which I loved that movie growing up, with John Candy, and it's about that. It's a true story surrounding the first Jamaican bobsled team. So yeah, I love Cool Runnings, but with this budget of the Meg had a budget of around 130 to like 100, close to 180 million dollars or something like that. I don't know, but it grossed over 530 million dollars worldwide. I think crucially, it was a huge hit in both North America and China, which I think it grossed like 150 million over there or something. But it proved that the power of a U.S. And China co-production, and this story with broad international appeal. That this kind of success and really basically guaranteed a sequel, and I think it just sent a clear message to studios out there. Um, for years, the creature feature genre had been largely, relegated to lower budget horror or those like campy, sci-fi channel movies like Sharknado. The Meg really brought it kind of back into that A-list blockbuster arena. It proved that audiences had, this massive, you know, want for a simple high concept monster movie. um if it was delivered with spectacular visuals, a charismatic star, and just a fun adventurous tone rather than pure horror. So I think it really paved the way for other films that have come out in the past few years, like the Godzilla versus King Kong movies, to lean more into spectacle and fun over that grit and seriousness. Um, just I think in an era that is dominated by interconnected cinematic universes like Marvel and DC, and this complex serialized storytelling, the Meg was just kind of refreshingly straightforward. It was this kind of self-contained story that audiences could enjoy, without any prior knowledge. Its success highlighted, the market for, uncomplicated, entertainment that delivers, exactly what the poster promises. And, the film made this definite mark, I think, on pop culture. It the movie became kind of shorthand for an over the top threat, and just that that image of Jason Statham facing off against a giant shark became very recognizable to so many. Um, while it hasn't achieved the iconic status of Jaws, it really carved its own niche. I think, and I'm glad to be a part of that niche. Audience now. As and it comes off, I think, as one of the most entertaining shark movies that I've ever watched. It's definitely that definitive modern giant shark movie. Um, but The Meg is a film, I think, that understands its purpose perfectly. It doesn't aspire to be this thought-provoking, drama, or a terrifying horror film or whatever. It aims to be that the biggest and the loudest and most entertaining shark, centric thrill ride that it could possibly be, and I think it definitely succeeds on all accounts. And propelled by the director here's experience, direction, and um, Jason Statham, just being the hero of it all. This film really just delivered a spectacle that resonated, I think, with audiences globally. Its legacy is that of a it's become this financial juggernaut that revived a genre. And I think that really proves that enduring power of just simple, fun, blockbuster entertainment, It gave shark movie fans, a new beast to celebrate. Um, Definitely, up there as one of my favorite shark movies, that killer shark movies that I've ever watched. I was so entertained, and I gotta admit, so when it comes to the sequel, I was like, man, that first movie was too good. This second one is probably going to suck, and it's probably not. I'm probably not going to like it. And like I said, the first Meg was a fun, you know, tentative step, into the water, of kind of reviving this type of subgenre. But I'll tell you, the Meg 2 really cannonballs into that deep end without a moment's hesitation. Uh, this movie was great. I love this one as well. I mean, I don't think I enjoyed it and was entertained as I was with the first movie, but I was definitely entertained with this one. Had a lot of fun with this one as well. And the director here, Ben Wheatley, which is a move that still boggles my mind. He takes the foundation of the first film and just cranks every dial to 11, pretty much. In this we don't get just one meg, we get three. And just in case that isn't enough, the movie throws in a giant squid and a swarm of these like amphibious dinosaur like creatures, just for good measure. I just think it's a an awesome B movie monster mash, with this blockbuster budget. It's a ton of fun, and Jason Statham, is once again just the perfect anchor, for this brand of chaos. He's not just playing this character; he's really embodying the spirit of this film. I mean, it's just I'm not even a big Jason Statham fan, but I just think that he worked perfectly in this role for these two movies. You know, when he holds this helicopter blade, to fend off this huge ass shark, or rides a jet ski with an explosive harpoon to joust another one. You know, there wasn't any moment where I was even questioning the physics. I'm just like, fuck yeah, this is amazing. I love this. And I think he is now, he's fully embraced, his role, as this character, as Jonas Taylor, as the world's foremost giant shark puncher. you know, the film's like big moment with this is the third act. So the fun island sequence is just this all out assault on your senses, and it's just a buffet, for people who are, for these for that are fans of these giant monster movies, these killer shark movies. It's what you always wanted to see, but other movies were too afraid to do, and that's just total mayhem. So these tourists, on water bikes, they become chum, and these inflatable obstacle courses become death traps, and Jason Statham and Wu Jing, they team up to deliver some of the most ludicrous, entertaining action scenes of the year. So, or of that year that came out in 2023. Uh, but is the dialogue cheesy? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely cheesy. Uh, but is the plot this flimsy excuse to get from one set piece to the next? Yeah, again, absolutely. But that's the point. The Meg 2, The Trench, knows exactly what it is. It's a movie that looks you, dead in the eye, asks if you want to see a man, kick a shark in the face, and then delivers on that promise with this triumphant, wicked grin. For a shark movie fan, this isn't just a fun time; it's a feast. I mean, several years after the events of the first film. Uh, Jonas Taylor, is working with the Mana One Research Institute now, run by Zhu Zhang, who is the uncle of Mai Ying from the first film. Um, and then she's much older now. I think she's 14 or something now here in the film. Um, and she was supposed to be, I think she's like 8 years old in the first film. But anyway, Jonas has become this surrogate father to her now. Um, and her, Su Yin from the first film has passed away at this point. They explain that in the beginning of the film and all that. But while Jonas, splits his time between research and that eco warfare against, environmental polluters, Zhu Ming has been training this captive megalodon. Named Hai Chi at the institute. So the team, embarks on this routine dive into the deep sea trench from which the first megalodon emerged. And during this dive, they discover this secret, an illegal deep sea mining operation going on, and the leader of this operation, Montez, has this personal vendetta against Jonas, and so he sabotages their mission, causing this explosion that ruptures the whole thermocline layer, and which is the barrier, separating the trench's ecosystem from the rest of the ocean. So now they're stranded on the ocean floor with these damaged submersibles, and Jonas and his crew have to kind of undertake this trek in these high tech exosuits to this remote station. All while being hunted by multiple megalodons and these other prehistoric creatures that have been unleashed. Um, so their escape to the surface, is only the beginning. The breach in the thermocline has allowed these three massive megs, a giant squid, and this pack of these vicious amphibious like creatures, which I think they call them snappers or something like that. To they're all have ascended to the surface now. And these creatures, they converge on this nearby populated tourist resort called Fun Island, and it sets the stage for this chaotic final battle where Jonas and Zhu Ming and their team, they have to use every resource that they have available, from helicopters to explosive harpoons, to stop this prehistoric onslaught and save all these people that are vacationing at this resort. So the director of the Meg 2, like I said, is Ben Wheatley. And the choice of Ben Wheatley to direct was really a major surprise. And I think, from what I understand, a big point of discussion within the film industry. Because he's this English filmmaker who is known for a body of work that is almost the polar opposite of a mainstream blockbuster like the Meg franchise. He's known for just psychological, and he's known for all kinds of different genres of film. Like psychological and folk horror, and just dark comedy and satires, and stylized action. So really hiring him was seen as either an inspired but odd choice, or this kind of director for hire type of situation. Um, However, his experience with tension, and visceral action, and dark humor arguably contributes to the Meg 2, and it's more self-aware, and chaotic tone. So I commend him for that. I think he did a great job with this movie. And it's while this is still a recent film, I think that the Meg 2 has already made this notable impact, and has just carved out a specific legacy for itself, because this film is a textbook example of this kind of critic proof movie. It was largely, panned, I think, by professional critics who cited its nonsensical plot, weak dialogue, just, generic characters. However, it's received, a much warmer reception from general audiences, who were seeking pure entertainment. People like myself. I think that this disconnect, really highlights a growing divide where certain films, succeed by completely ignoring these critical metrics and just focusing, solely on delivering crowd pleasing spectacles. So I think its legacy is tied to proving that for some genres, fun factor and spectacle can vastly outweigh, traditional, cinematic quality just in the eyes of the paying public. Um, and despite, a kind of softer domestic opening than the original film, the Meg 2 was just it was a significant, international box office success. This one, it grossed nearly $400 million worldwide against its budget. Um, its performance was particularly strong in China. Thanks in large part to the casting of Chinese superstar Wu Jing. So this reinforced, the modern blockbuster model where international appeal, especially in the Chinese market, is critical for a film's financial viability. It solidifies the Meg as this bankable global franchise. And honestly, I can't wait to see more of these movies. I can't wait for the Meg 3. I don't know if there's any plans for the Meg 3 right now, but I mean, the way this movie ends, it kind of like sets it up for another sequel. And man, if there is, I'm excited. That's one I would definitely go to the theater and watch. Um, but the shark movie genre, was born from the suspense horror of Jaws. While films like Deep Blue Sea introduce more action, the Meg franchise has fully cemented that shift of the giant shark subgenre from horror into this pure, large scale action adventure. And the Meg 2 leans even further into this, becoming less of a creature feature and more like a superhero movie, where Jason Statham's power is, fighting these giant monsters. Its impact is to move the goalposts for what audiences expect from these films. Not scares, but explosive, over the top fun. And that's definitely what I got from it. And like I said, you know, I think out of these two, I like the original better. Had more fun with it, but that you know, not saying a whole lot because I had a ton of fun with this one too, and I just think the primary legacy of this one is that it was successful enough to all but guarantee a third installment. Like I don't know if there's been any news of a third installment, like I said, but if there is, I can't wait for it. This one doubled down on the absurdity, and it really found this receptive audience. I feel, it proved that the formula has legs for sure, and just the franchise is no longer just about this giant shark. It's about this ever expanding prehistoric ecosystem of monsters. Position itself um, as a direct and more light-hearted competitor to legendary films as MonsterVerse with like Godzilla and Kong. But I guess in conclusion, the Meg 2, The Trench is a film I just think that that understands its audience, and its purpose, with this absolute clarity. It's a B movie monster, mash given this kind of with this um this A-list budget, and it was helmed by this kind of indie darling director, which was questionable, but it worked, and he gleefully embraced the chaos of the assignment here. And while it won't be remembered for its artistic merit or whatever, I just think its legacy is that of this defiant, financially successful blockbuster that that prioritize fun above all else. And it's in the name, in the island, in the movie, Fun Island. I mean, this whole movie is one big fun island to me, and I think it proved that in this modern cinematic landscape, there is a massive and hungry audience for these unapologetically silly and spectacular, entertaining creature features. Um, it definitely secures its own future and solidifying Jason Statham's status as this reigning king of the action monster genre. So anybody out there involved with these movies, if you see this, please do the Meg 3. I definitely want to see it. These movies are awesome. They're so fun. And yeah, I can't wait for more. But that brings me to the last movie that I'm going to be talking about to conclude Shark Week. And so, if you remember what I said a little bit earlier at the beginning of this stream, so I named the title of this episode um, Feast of Flesh. And, while killer sharks are definitely, flesh eaters, um, this next movie I'm going to be talking about is a completely different kind of flesh eater. It's focused around different kinds of a different kind of flesh eater. Um, and while a killer shark is featured in this film, its focus is around a completely different type of creature. And I figured this would be a good transition by covering this film on Shark Week, as since I'm going to be transitioning into next week's group of films we'll be talking about. And this is 1979's classic horror Italian zombie film, Zombie, or Zombie 2, or Zombie Flesh Eaters, whichever you like to call it. So, for fans of the undead or zombies, there are certainly, holy grails of the genre. You have Romero's, foundational classics, which gave, zombie films their roots. Um, you have, the fast moving zombies of the Return of the Living Dead films, or, 28 Days Later, and other modern zombie films. But then there is the Italian school of zombie horror, and its undisputed king uh, of Italian zombies is Lucio Fulci. So, his 1979 film, which, like I said, was known simply as Zombie or Zombie 2 or Zombie Flesh Eaters, whichever you want to call it. It's not just a movie. It's a rite of passage, I think, for a lot of zombie film fans. Um, this was the first ever Italian horror film that I was exposed to. So this is really what the movie that started off for me as far as being a fan of Italian horror films. This movie, it's a grimy, beautiful and just utterly essential piece of horror history. That trades that social commentary, from the Romero films for just this kind of pure, visceral, atmospheric dread. Um, and Give me one second here. I thought my thing froze up for a second. Anyway, so just forget consumerism and and social commentary. Fulci isn't interested in why the dead walk. He's obsessed with um, just the sheer gut wrenching horror of their existence. So, this film is a masterpiece of mood, a slow, kind of hypnotic descent into this, tropical nightmare, where the heat is as oppressive as the hordes of the dead. So it's a film that you don't just watch, you feel it, and I can remember the first couple of times I ever watched this years ago. It really gave me goosebumps, just watching this movie. And so this movie, it opens not on a remote island, but in the heart of civilization, which is this New York harbor. Um, it's this an abandoned, sailboat drifts into this port, and when these police investigate it, they're attacked by this huge rotting corpse. You know, uh, this walking, moaning, disgusting looking corpse. And this incident brings together, our four protagonists of the film, which is Ann Bowles, played by Tisa Farrow, who's the daughter of the boat's missing owner. Then you have Peter West, who's played by Ian McCulloch. Who is this? He's this journalist who's chasing the story. Brian Hull, played by Al Cliver, and then Susan Barrett, who's played by Aretta Gay. And they're this couple that's selling the Caribbean. So anyway, their investigation leads them to this cursed island of Matul, I think it's what it's called. So it's this place that's kind of gripped by this strange plague. And the local doctor there, Doctor Menard, who's played by Richard Johnson, he's struggling to understand this phenomenon it's rooted in voodoo legend. That these dead are returning to life. So from here, the plot becomes this kind of series of, stunningly, orchestrated horror set pieces. And, Fulci, masterfully builds tension, moving from that eerie, quiet of the island to these explosive moments of just, shock and violence. And the zombies here are not these, the gray skin, shufflers of Pittsburgh like we knew in Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. They are these maggot-ridden, earth-caked monstrosities, rising slowly from these Spanish conquistador graves. You know, they are, supernatural forces of nature, and their only drive is to, just to tear the living apart. And so the film culminates in this kind of desperate siege, on Dr. Menard's small makeshift hospital. This chaotic and claustrophobic battle for survival that ends, with one of the most iconic and just bleak final shots in horror movie history. It's a slow pan across the Brooklyn Bridge, now overrun with all these walking zombies and the Walking Dead, if you will. So the island was just the beginning. But let's get to the reason why I chose this movie to watch last on Shark Week to transition into Zombie Week. Uh, you can't discuss this film without talking about the scene that really cemented its legend. It's a moment of such audacious, logic defying insanity that it represents everything wonderful about Italian genre filmmaking. So while diving, the completely nude Susan Barrett, is confronted by a very real tiger shark, and just as the shark closes in, a new threat emerges from down in the coral reef, and it's this waterlogged, barnacle encrusted zombie. And so what follows is this kind of slow underwater ballet of carnage. The zombie, grabs the shark. The two monsters are grappling, deep underwater. The shark rips off the zombie's arm. The zombie takes a massive bite out of the shark's side. You know, this scene serves almost no narrative purpose. It's just pure spectacle. It's Fulci, with just that, who's decided to film something that no one had ever dared to imagine. It was performed by a professional shark wrangler, who wrestled this real tiger shark, which it was drugged, but still, incredibly dangerous. All while he's wearing this zombie makeup. And that the result here is one of the most memorable. I can't believe they filmed that type of moments in history. It's the film's mission statement in this kind of single unbelievable sequence. Um, but going back to since I've mentioned him a couple times already, Lucio Fulci, is revered by gore hounds as one of the godfathers of gore. While he directed films in many genres, including westerns and comedies, he found his true calling in the late 1970s with horror. He's known for this kind of style that prioritizes atmosphere, and these dreamlike, logic, or rather nightmare like logic, whichever way you want to look at it, and just this kind of unflinching, graphically detailed violence. Um, he Fulci he never shied away from uh from showing the carnage in his films. His films are infamous for their graphic, often kind of slow motion depictions of bodily destruction. And he really had this unique and disturbing obsession with eyes. One of the most infamous scenes in Zombie involves this zombie slowly pulling a woman's head towards a jagged shard of wood, culminating in her eyeball being graphically impaled. And this kind of thing, appears in many of his other films. Um, but a Fulci film in general is really driven by mood. Um, the plots can be thin or even nonsensical, but the dreamlike quality and then just that oppressive sense of dread is really what makes them unforgettable. He was less a storyteller, but more of a painter of nightmares, if that makes sense. Um, he frequently collaborated with the composer Fabio Frizzi, who's has these very eerie, synth heavy scores, and they're definitely just as iconic as the visuals that they accompany. I feel the main theme for Zombie is one of my favorite horror, themes of all time. It just really has this haunting, percussive feel about it. It's a masterpiece. But his other films that he's worked on include The Beyond, and City of the Living Dead, House by the Cemetery, um, which really, that forms his whole unofficial Gates of Hell trilogy. Um, and just represents that peak of his that his surreal and gory style. Um, and this was considered, in Italy, an unofficial sequel to George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which in Italy was released under the title Zombie. Um, so to capitalize on that success of that film, you know, the producers retitled Fulci's film Zombie 2, marketing it as a sequel, despite having no connection, to Romero's film. Um, and this was brilliant. It was ethically dubious, but it was this brilliant marketing move that made it, a massive international hit. And Fulci's work, established a clear alternative um, to the Romero zombie. While Romero's were products of a scientific or a social plague, Fulci's were often supernatural. Voodoo curse, rotting corpses. They were slower, more decayed. They felt more ancient and unstoppable. Um, this look, I think, created by makeup artist Gianetto De Rossi, you know, just became that template for countless other Italian zombie films. Um, And if you want to get into the video nasty stuff, in the early 1980s, Zombie was famously placed on the UK's video nasties list. A list of these banned films that were deemed too obscene, for home video release. Um, this censorship, it just it ironically gave the film this legendary, forbidden aura that only amplified its cult status, even more, and just made it a must see for these rebellious horror fans. And I think that's how word of mouth is really what helped create the hype for this movie. Because when I found out about this movie just from friends and stuff of other when I was getting deep into the horror genre, and it wasn't until I was like in high school that I found out about this film. And just I had friends that were talking about it, and just I think one of them like had seen where, yeah, this movie's banned in some other countries and all this blah blah blah. So we just got deep into it, and just the more and more I learned about it over the years, it just made me even more of a fan. And especially with the effects in this, this film is a landmark, of practical gore effects. That eye gouge scene is still, I think, studied by a lot of effects artists, and revered for its kind of convincing and that almost stomach churning execution. I mean, it's hard to watch sometimes. As many times I've seen this film, um, that scene is still hard to watch. And DeRossi's rotten, worm infested zombie designs were groundbreaking, and just really pushed the boundaries of what could be shown on screen. Um, but I guess in conclusion, Lucio Fulci's Zombie is so much more than a gore film. It's a hypnotic, surreal, and just masterfully, crafted horror experience. Yeah, the dubbing is awkward, and the acting can be stiff, but those are superficial flaws in a work of such potent atmosphere. I think all those things are just a part of its charm. It's a film that that assaults the senses. It's a human fever dream of tropical rot and graphic violence. And it's I think it's powered by, in my opinion, one of the greatest horror scores ever composed. Um, for I think any true fan of the genre, Zombie is not just recommended. It's a required viewing. It's that raw, unfiltered heart of zombie horror, just kind of beaten with this primal, unrelenting rhythm. And I definitely, had to throw that in there for Shark Week as a transition going into this week's Zombie Week, just because of that zombie versus shark scene. So, guys, I guess that's it. Thank you guys for checking this video out. Thank you guys for just being here with me on Shark Week, and I hope you guys enjoyed me talking about all these killer shark movies and talking about Lucio Fulci's Zombie tonight, as much as I enjoyed doing them. And so just stay tuned for this week, as I'm going to be talking about even more zombie films, including a couple of Romero's films that I've not talked about yet here on the channel, including the original Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead. So just stay tuned for that. Check those out. The first part will be up on this Thursday, and then next Sunday will be part 2 of that. Um, I want to thank everyone who either watched this live and or was here in the chat, or or if you're watching this on replay, just thank you guys very much. Please drop me a comment below on what your favorite is from these movies I've talked about tonight, or if you have another favorite killer shark movie that you'd like to talk about, and let me know that if you think I should watch and I should review. Let me know. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button to catch more videos from me like this one. And click that bell for any future notifications. So I guess with all that said, guys, I'm Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.